Well, let's get to the main event here. Tonight's speaker is Amy Jo Kim. She's actually spoken here before, and everyone always loves what she has to say and share advice she shares with us. She's going to be talking to us today on how to drive deep user engagement, and with examples from Snapchat, Slack, and Kickstarter. She's a game designer startup coach. She worked on some products you've probably played before, Rock Band, Sims, Netflix. She has a book on community building on the web. As I mentioned, it sounds like you have a new book coming out, which I'm excited to learn more about. She is an expert, has a PhD in Behavioral Neuroscience, and she has a website, Getting to Alpha, where she offers master classes and workshops. And basically, the way I describe her is like she's a game designer who's now teaching product people and designers in startups and companies how to apply those principles to make your products engaging, even if it's not a game. A lot of times people are like, oh, why would I come to this? I'm not a game designer. It's like, well, it's how to apply those concepts to your non-game products to make them more engaging. So with that, let's give Amy Jo Kim a warm welcome.
What a great looking crowd. All right. So, how many of you use Slack? Oh yeah. How many of you play with Snapchat every now and again? Okay. How about Kickstarter? How many of you have bid on a Kickstarter campaign? How many of you have run a Kickstarter campaign? All right, the few, the proud. Well, we're going to go deep into what makes these games engaging, and there's some things that they have in common that might not be obvious, might even be counterintuitive, but I think you'll really enjoy trying out these ideas with your product. Oops, something happened. What did I do?
Nothing. It's not you. Let me
So, I want to know, excuse me, if you can relate to any of these feelings. Do you ever, oops, I guess they all came together. Let me ask them one at a time. Do you ever wonder if you're asking the exact right questions to get your product to product market fit? Do you ever wonder about that? I do, I'll be honest. Do you ever wonder if you're going to find those passionate superfans who are going to bring your idea to life? Or maybe you're going to lose out to their competitors? Has that ever kept you up at night? It's kept me up. Have you ever wished that you had the recipe, the blueprint to avoid the leaky bucket syndrome? Where you have a product that people like and try out, but they don't stick around for months and years. Have you ever been in that situation as a product person? Well, I've been in all these situations, and a lot of my clients have too. So as Dan mentioned, I'm a game designer and product coach. And I've worked on some really big hits. And I've worked with some international well-known brands, bringing key ideas and products and services to life. Some of the seminal experiences I had that shaped my way of thinking were Ultima Online. Any Ultima Online lovers in the house? All right, yeah. Worked on that, again, very early, bringing the core systems to life. The Sims, any Sims players? Worked on that as well for 3 years before it shipped. Rock Band? My favorite game of all time, I have to fully admit. I love that. I'm a musician, so it's like one of the few games I'm good at. Covet Fashion? Ladies? Covet Fashion is a very innovative mobile game that's an evergreen hit, 3.5 years after it launched, still growing, still making money. And these are some of the people that I learned from. Raph Koster and Richard Garriott and Ultima Online, The Sims. I worked with Will Wright for many years. Alex Rogopoulos and his amazing team at Harmonix. And Blair Ethington and Jeff Zhang at Covet Fashion, which has since been purchased by Glue Mobile, who made the Kim Kardashian hit that you may either love or hate. So what I want to teach you today are the 3 blind spots that I see smart entrepreneurs, smart product leaders make again and again that keep them from finding product market fit and being able to drive long-term engagement. And I'm going to show you how to do this with game thinking. So, game thinking, what is that? It's not gamification. Game thinking is what gamification wants to be when it grows up. People use the word gamification, it means all kinds of things. Often I think of The Princess Bride. Any Princess Bride lovers in the room? And I think, oh, I'm not sure that means what you think it means. So game thinking is an approach that is shaped by my experiences working on these huge hits. I also worked on Netflix and eBay and the New York Times paywall, not just games. And it combines some things that I think you all already enjoy combining. First of all, it starts with game design, not gamification. Game design, which is how you create an engaging experience that gets better as your player gets more skilled. That's the essence of game design, and it's missing from almost all gamification. It also combines our friends, Agile and Lean UX. The Lean Startup really articulated so much of what makes good, iterative, experimental product design, where you're de-risking your process by running these very smart, small, high-learning experiments. And Agile tells us so much about how to build a product more effectively. But what they often don't tell us is what product to build. Design thinking, otherwise known as user-centered iterative product design, which is what us old school UX designers from way back call design thinking. It's a new name for something that's really important, which is user-centered, meaning you start with an understanding of your customer, not with tech. And iterative, you do early prototyping, you do really rough things, and you learn through being in an iterative loop with particular customers. That's the essence of design thinking. And something that gets talked about very little, but if you're a product manager or a designer or any kind of product leader, this is important for you to understand if you want to do 21st century innovation, and that's systems thinking. Now, as a game designer, this is my bread and butter. Something you may not know, excuse me, is that there's as many types of game designers as there are movie directors. Sometimes people say, oh, you're a game designer, you could design my game, right? Well, there's system designers, there's narrative designers, there's people that start with art, there's people that specialize in shooters, there's people that specialize in strategy games. There's so many great game designers, but they're not all the same any more than a documentary movie director would be great at doing an action flick, right? They have different skill sets, even though they both make films. Same with game design. But a really important part of game design, that especially digital game design, is the systems underneath the game. And that's really where game thinking and gamification diverge, and where you can get some skills and an approach from gaming that can help you build long-term engagement into your products from the ground up, not sprinkle it on later. And it's that combination of systems thinking, game design, lean UX, and design thinking that I have found gives you measurably and reliably faster, smarter innovation. That's what I'm going to tell you about now. So let me tell you the 3 blind spots I see again and again. The first one, I bet you're familiar with this, some of you, is falling in love with your idea. Has anyone here ever fallen in love with an idea? Oh, I can tell you about the startup that went through hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that one. I bet other of you can too. So this is something that experienced designers, experienced product leaders often counsel younger beginner ones, because they say, I went through this. But it's so common, and I can tell you, as somebody who's raised venture money and done my own startup, when it's your baby and your butt on the line, your tuss on the line, then it's very different and it's very hard not to believe in it. The same skills that make you successful raising money and forming a team, your salesmanship skills, your skills to sell your vision, get in your way when you're bringing a new innovative idea to life. Linus Pauling, who knows a few things about creative success, he's a Nobel-winning scientist, likes to say the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. This is the essence of it. If any of you have ever heard of, I'm forgetting the name of it. Let me just show you the next slide. So this is the process whereby smart people, successful innovators, bring their ideas to life. At the top, it's called stage gate theory. How many of you have heard of stage gate theory? This is a game designer's picture of stage gate theory. Dan Cook, who's actually going to be one of our mentors at Game Thinking Live, he drew this picture, and he practices it Dan has successfully run an indie game studio for 7 years, no small feat. At the top, what you see is all the little dots. Those are tiny high learning experiments. You're not invested in just one idea, you're running experiments. You've got a few ideas. You're going to see which one bubbles to the top. And as you go through the gates, there's fewer ideas, you invest more in them. The idea here is that you set up a process so that your ideas earn resources by actually being vetted through a process that involves real users. And it turns out this can help you do what every good product leader should do. Don't fall in love with an idea. Fall in love with the problem. Fall in love with solving a problem for your customers. If you keep going back to that, you will have your North Star to innovate faster and smarter. The second blind spot, building the wrong MVP. You all know what an MVP is, right? Minimum viable product. We've read the Lean Startup book. We've watched Steve Blank. We've gotten out of the building. We all understand that this is something we should do. But how do you know if you're building the right MVP? It's actually tricky. There's no one right solution, one size fits all. It's definitely not a fake landing page for everybody, for reasons that you'll understand in a moment. So here, I go to what I learned working with Ralph Koster and Will Wright and these brilliant game designers. Ralph Koster wrote a book every one of you should read called The Theory of Fun. It's in its second printing now. Ralph is also going to be with us at Game Thinking Live. He likes to say fun is just another word for learning. That's a deep statement. So every product doesn't need to be fun. But if you want to build long-term engagement, creating a learning architecture for your experience is the smartest thing you could do. Much smarter than sprinkling trinkets on top of it with gamification. So what I've learned, and what you're going to understand in just a few minutes, is that the best MVP isn't a fake landing page. That can be a part of your MVP process. You can certainly do a concierge. But the best MVP is to build a simple, stripped-down core learning loop. That's how games do it. We call it finding the fun. But if you want to avoid leaky bucket syndrome, like I talked about before, if you want to build long-term engagement from the ground up, this is your blueprint, and I'm going to break it down for you. So now, the number one blind spot I see, so common, so easy to avoid, listening to the wrong customers. Can any of you feel this? Do you feel it with me? Yeah. It's really hard. Look, I'm a really experienced designer. It's still hard to figure out. I love this quote from Paul Buckeye. He runs Y Combinator. This guy knows a thing or two about startups. He likes to say, your goal if you're innovating is to create something just a few people want passionately and love, even if most people don't get it right away. Often, if you're not trained as a UX researcher, if you don't have that background, you listen to Steve Blank, you read the Lean Startup, and you say, okay, I'm going to get out of the building, I'm going to go talk to customers, you do an analysis, maybe you make some personas, and you go try and talk to your target customers. And that's good, but very, very often, if you're innovating, if you're doing anything that's not just cookie cutter, you don't actually want to just get out of the building and talk to your target customers. That will lead you down the wrong path. What you want to do is talk to your early, high-need, high-value, passionate customers. They're harder to find, but you will save yourself months of time and get way closer to product market fit if you do. Again, I'm going to break this down for you. So, anybody recognize this chart? Our friend, the crossing the chasm chart. And for those of you who don't, this is a really powerful idea. And the punchline of this chart, this was written by Jeffrey Moore in 1991, this book, Crossing the Chasm. The punchline of the book is that if you want to cross the chasm from a passionate early market to mainstream, you can't use the same techniques you used early, you have to use different techniques. And Jeffrey Moore wrote this book about his experience taking the Apple II computer with the two Steves, Wozniak and Jobs, when it was a hobbyist hit. That's important, remember that. When it was a hobbyist hit, and turning it into a mainstream hit. He wrote this book about it. What most people forget is first you have to have the hobbyist hit before you cross the chasm. That's why you have to delight your early, passionate customers first. That's why Paul Buckeye says what he says, because he's seen it firsthand over and over again. I have too. I have worked with literally thousands of entrepreneurs all over the world. And what I've seen is that if you go after your target market, the thing you're told to do, and you're innovating, you will get feedback from the wrong people. And you will base your decisions on that, and it will get you into a world of hurt. So let's dig into this with real hardcore examples. You love Slack. Let's start with Slack. Let's talk about Slack's journey to mastery, and let's break down what their core learning loop is. The thing that makes Slack more interesting as you get better at it. As you probably know, Slack started as a game called Glitch, a wonderful, cooperative, creative, multiplayer game that failed financially. 5 years in the making, lots of my friends worked on it. I've known Stuart for years. Passion. Boy, did they love that product. They were so in love with it. So did lots of people. Just the business of it didn't work. So they had been developing alongside of this a product, just a communications tool built on top of IRC, the old school, chat in the internet, with a small distributed development team. There were people in Vancouver, people in San Francisco, and they were working together on this game, with a lot of assets, a lot of complexity. So they built a tool to facilitate their shared work, across towns, across cities. And Stuart was smart enough and lucky enough when when Glitch cratered, Stuart said, okay, well, what do we have? We have this tool, and it's kind of ugly, and we could polish it up. And guess what? We've been iterating on it for 3 years, and it's actually pretty good. It's pretty effective. And that became Slack. So let's look at how Slack takes their customers on a journey to mastery. A journey to mastery is different. It's like a customer journey. Those of you who have done customer journey maps, come on in. Use your customer journey mapping skills. The key difference here is the frame of your design. You're framing your design as one, this is an experience that changes over time, and two, this is an experience where my goal is to help my customer achieve mastery. My goal isn't to manipulate my customer's behavior like so many systems that say they're about engagement. They're really about behavior manipulation. That works in the short term, and it doesn't work in the long term. That's why so many games and products and gamified efforts have a 4 to 6 week fall off in their engagement. It's about creating a journey that evolves over time. The first stage is discovery. Discovery is for visitors. That's when someone hasn't invested yet. They want to know if it's right for them. So in Slack, what's interesting about discovery is that it's social. So the social discovery, usually people find out about Slack through a friend, through a teammate. Now you see it more being deployed by IT departments. But, especially when Slack was getting started, it was very, very much a social discovery experience, which is a lot more like Minecraft than it is like Yammer. Onboarding is for newbies. You've made the decision. You're going to check it out. You got to learn the ropes and start getting value. That's onboarding in a nutshell. Onboarding could be an hour or a month. Depends on the complexity of your product. In Slack, there's a brilliant onboarding. Very simple, but very game-like. What you experience is a single-player, one-on-one interaction with a friendly, helpful bot. You're not yet in the multiplayer environment where your teammates are. You're just single-player, just getting a little training, a few tips to help you not look like an idiot when you get into the multiplayer environment where you're working with your team. Any of you who have ever played a console game probably recognize this pattern as the training level, where you have a single-player training experience with a bot, often, and maybe he looks like a commander, right, if you're playing a strategy game on a console. But this is right out of game design, and it's something I've actually worked with on many, many teams, which is we have this awesome multiplayer experience, but what do we do for onboarding? People often have ideas, we could matchmake them, we have mentors and this and that. You know what? Sometimes just a really good single-player controlled experience for onboarding, which is really an arc, not a loop, is the best thing. And that's exactly what Slack did. Now let's talk about habit building. This is different than onboarding. So many people make this mistake. They get them confused. Habit building, think of it as your day 30 experience. What's going on? What's the session look like? where, from beginning to end of someone's experience with your product. What is it that's pulling them back? Most importantly, what is it that your customer is getting better at? It doesn't have to be in your product. What are they getting better at in their life that they care about? When you use Slack, part of why Slack works so well isn't that you get better at using Slack, although you do through this very graceful unfolding of functionality. Part of why Slack works so well is you're getting better at working with your team. That's something you care about. You don't care about getting better at Slack. You care about getting your job done better with your team. And if Slack delivers that, it's a learning experience. And you should think about that too for your product. That's what habit building does. So in Slack, habit building is really built around just initially engaging with your team, seeing the messages that you have to read. But what is it you're getting better at? You're actually getting better at customization. Think about your experience of Slack. First thing you might do is customize your notifications so they don't drive you crazy, right? Just the ones you want. Then you can customize your chat. There's emojis, your channel, whoever's operating your channel can customize that with plugins. You can start to customize your bot, your reading bot, and you can keep going right into integrations, which is where Slack's mastery journey. Think about the journey to mastery in Slack. There's a through line. The through line is customization. More and more and more, you're making Slack just what you want it to be, all the way into integrating into the API and even applying to the Slack fund to get funding for your integration. So that's what the journey to mastery of Slack looks like. And it's really built around this very simple idea, which is helping the customer get better over time at something that matters to them. And if more products did that, they would be more deeply engaging, because us humans care a lot about mastery and autonomy and getting better at stuff that we care about. That's built into us. That's self-determination theory. Now, to do that, if you're building a digital product, you have to figure out how your experience gets better as your customer becomes more skilled. And that's where core game design comes in. That's what game designers do. They create an experience that's different and better as people get more skilled and get better at a particular thing that they're doing in the game. How do game designers do that? They do it with this. Do it with a learning loop. So let me break this down for you. This is that thing where you go, well, that sounded nice, but what's actionable? How do I actually do that? Let me show you how Slack does it. So the difference between a learning loop and a compulsion loop, which you may also hear about, or an operant conditioning loop, is a learning loop is built around skill building, not around manipulation. Okay? So here's our core learning loop of Slack. Let's break it down. There's really three things to remember. The first is you need some repeatable, pleasurable activity that's triggered or satisfies some internal urge or need. Without that, you really can't build something that's going to be compelling over time. All the trinkets and gamification in the world, if there isn't that, won't give you long-term engagement. So in Slack, the internal trigger is basically FOMO. Once you move your work into there, once you move your team communications, you are, wonder what's going on, especially if you're the leader. So you want to check your updates because you want to stay on top of things, whether you see notifications or not. And then what's the engaging activity? It's reading and responding to updates, like you do on Facebook, like you do on Twitter. That's what you do. Slack nicely tells you when you're done with that too. That's the first thing. There it is. There's your Slack channel where you're all familiar with you're doing that. The second thing to remember about a learning loop is that you need to provide simple feedback that tells people if they're on the right track. Without feedback is much more fundamental and important than progress in game design. Without feedback, you can't get better at something. So in Slack, simple feedback is, I've read my updates. There they are. I have some updates. I've read them. Boom. I feel good. Just like with email. Really comfortable, really familiar. Third part is what most people think about as game design. And it's something that you can do later in your process. Very often when game designers work, they don't start with this. They start with that feedback and that core activity. And they work on that. And then they layer in progress and investment engaged triggers. What's an engaged trigger, you're wondering? I'll tell you in a moment. So in Slack, the progress and investment systems, this is where system design comes in. If you just sprinkle trinkets, it's meaningless. But if you build a system, a progress system that's meaningful, then people get engaged. But it has to be integrated into what you're doing. So in Slack, progress and investment, as I mentioned earlier, really comes through customization. You also put your stuff into there and you can search it. But the more you customize something, the more engaged you are with it. And when you get your Slack channel all set up like you like it, you're not going to walk away from that. It works better than ever. So that's really the system that works. So an engaged trigger is a concept out of game design that could work for all of you. So you probably have heard about different kinds of triggers from the many, habit design books and habit design things. And there's internal triggers I mentioned earlier. That's an emotion or an urge, okay? An internal trigger. You have to go to the bathroom, that's one. But also just FOMO, lonely, I want to go to Facebook, those kind of internal triggers. And then there's external triggers that remind you to do things. Notifications are the big one. But we all know people can turn notifications off. So you actually have to connect them to something people care about. And then other ones like, leaving your running shoes at the door to remind you, that's an external trigger. An engaged trigger is a special kind of trigger that only kicks in once somebody is engaged in your system and is invested in your system. The perfect example is checking your stats. Think about your behavior on Twitter, those of you who use Twitter. When you first join, if you're not posting, you don't check your stats. There's like nothing interesting. There's no feedback loop. Once you start posting, once you start getting likes and retweets and building followers, then you start caring about your stats. And if you post something you're nervous about, you're sitting there going, oh, I wonder if anybody liked it. I wonder if anybody retweeted it, right? That's the engaged trigger. Games are excellent at this. But you can do it, even if you don't have a game, you just have to think about creating an investment system that then creates an engaged trigger that people want to come back to. More on that in a moment. Here we have the engaged trigger for Slack. This is Slack's, the little red dot that says you've got updates. And that wouldn't work as well if you didn't customize it, because it would be overwhelming. But Slack encourages you to customize your notifications. It guides you by the hand. Why? Because then that trigger is less likely to get turned off. It's more likely to work for you. All right, now let's talk about Snapchat. Very different, but there's some interesting similarities. How many of you have used Snapchat at least once? Okay. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? If you're a UX designer like me, you're like, what? But there's a brilliance to Snapchat that I really appreciate. So let's talk about Snapchat's journey to mastery. Discovery for visitors, very much social. Part of what it took me a while to understand about Snapchat was, part of why it's hard to understand is it drives people to explain it to each other. Young people get it, but oldsters like me, I need like my daughter or my friend or my niece to explain it to me. And that's cool. That's part of the beauty of it. Again, very similar to how games work. Social discovery is pretty much a lot how games, especially multiplayer games, spread. Now let's talk about onboarding. It's exploratory, but it's also very social, the onboarding. So this is related to having your friend show you it. What do you do when you're learning Snapchat? You mess around. You try filters and decide if you're going to post them. You see what the new filters are each day. And then you get your friend to show you stuff, right? People are very much showing each other stuff socially. Now let's talk about that engaged habit, that habit building, that day 30 experience. What's going on? It's pretty much you're checking out something new. It's not that different than Slack in that way. What's new? Or checking out your feedback if you posted something and you want to see that. We'll see that in a moment. What does Snapchat do to make you get engaged like that? There's new filters every day. There's people posting stuff. There's stories, and they added brands you can follow, et cetera, et cetera. And then what about mastery? The whole point of this journey to mastery is that you design each stage to basically head people toward mastery. So what is Snap doing there? What are you getting better at by using Snapchat in the real world? That's the question. You're getting better at sharing curated glimpses into your life. Think about spectacles. Think about just how that plays right into that. Think about the people that have mastered Snapchat. What are they good at? That's what they're good at. Is it a real version of their life? Probably not. Is it curated? Are they figuring out what plays on Snapchat? Are they figuring out how to share their life with other people in this little glimpse way? Yeah, the people that are good at Snapchat, there is something to get good out there. And there's the feedback and the statistics that tell you if you're good at it. So Snapchat's core learning loop looks like this. The repeatable, pleasurable activity is viewing snaps, right? And what's the trigger? What's the internal urge or trigger? It's often boredom, or it's, I wonder if anybody responded to me. But pull out Snapchat, it's easy, I can consume one or two, whatever. Very, very easy to consume. So there's an example, I just go in there and I start looking at snaps, oh, look at that, it's so silly. Oh, now I have to go back and work. Like that's my experience. Okay, what's the feedback system? Very similar to Slack. No more snaps to read. You've read your responses, you've done it. Very, very simple. But sometimes the simple feedback is the best. It's always the place to start. Now what about progress, investment, and engaged triggers? What's going on there? Well, that all happens when you create. When you are a creator, when you create your snaps, share them. And creating snaps is what creates the engaged trigger. For instance, here we have a picture, a snap somebody took, and then a new feature Snap released recently, which is you can just text in response, not just respond. So that's cool, now I can get messages. But if you look over there on the right, you see something a lot of you are familiar with, which is if you have a story and you start posting on your story, you can actually see not only who's consumed your story, but how much of your story they consume. Oh my God, it's like crack. It's feedback. It's amazing. So that's part of how Snapchat is creating that journey to mastery and engaging daily loop. Now, let's talk about Kickstarter. One of my very favorite things. Kickstarter is a little more complicated because Kickstarter is a two-sided marketplace. How many of you are involved in building or analyzing or managing two-sided marketplaces? Okay, this is especially for you. And those of the rest of you, any marketplace if you ever aspire to work in marketplaces or online gaming, this is stuff, or even in educational software, you have to understand this kind of stuff. So I'm going to explain it to you right now. So Cindy Au, another one of our awesome Game Thinking Live mentors, she was the VP of community at Kickstarter. She was the first community manager. So she grew that thing from a few thousand people to millions. And part of what's fascinating about Cindy is she tells about how much they said no and what they said no to. As product managers, this is so much a part of your job as any product leader. So let's start with looking at the funder's journey, the person who's going to lay down their money and purchase, for a Kickstarter campaign, which requires less investment. Again, like many of these game-like products I'm sharing with you, they're not gamified, but they're game-like. Discovery is very social on Kickstarter. How do you find out about Kickstarter projects? Email, social media, you see somebody post. So this is one particular one. I had the great pleasure to work with LeVar Burton, who was on Star Trek and created Reading Rainbow, helped him bring his product to life, his Reading Rainbow 2.0. And he ran a Kickstarter campaign, and I love everything he does. So this was the first thing I saw that pulled me into the campaign. This is how I discovered LeVar's Kickstarter campaign. This woman said, I wouldn't be an author without him, so $600 goes for your campaign. I'm like, wow. It was so heartfelt and meaningful, and there was a photo. So I clicked through. That was discovery. Onboarding is very exploratory in Kickstarter. You can click right through and go to your campaign, but Kickstarter makes it really easy to browse videos and to browse campaigns. Here's campaigns you might like, et cetera, et cetera. They really designed for that. And there's a method to their madness. They do this because they want you to feel empowered and like you're making active, real choices. They're really honing in on the autonomy piece. And one of the things I love is this, if you go and you look at their search page, any of you UX nerds in the room, because I'm definitely a UX nerd at heart, like Dan and like many of us, they have this awesome, they've been developing and iterating on their search. And so they have search terms now, like recommended for you, and you can pull down all the other stuff. Sorted, it tells you how it's sorted by date, sorted by ending soon, sorted by this and that. And then they're sorted by magic. And that's kind of like the old Flickr. There was a Flickr rating system. But it's cool because it's very transparent. They're telling you that. But you can also play around and explore. Again, games are great at this. Games are great. As a game designer, I spent years working through like, okay, well, what's the explorer path through this? And how much on rails do we want this experience to be versus how much do we let people explore? It's always a balancing act. Same thing here. Let's talk about engaged habits. Here we are at the LeVar Burton Kickstarter, and it's awesome. There was a beautiful video. It was like a master class in Kickstarter campaigning. So once you donate, which is a big moment in your experience, now you're on the other side. You're part of the community. You're rooting for your project to succeed. You're checking it. You're sharing about it. You donated. You want it to hit its goal. You want it to succeed. So you start doing these behaviors that are very engaged if you're part of a campaign. Each campaign is like a little 30-day co-op game that you're all playing together. And then how do you head toward mastery? Well, part of what you do is you browse, and donate. And then Kickstarter's so smart. They, right when you've donated, they say, awesome, you're part of the community. Want to share your story? And they encourage you to share your story. And now we're back to the beginning where someone who shared their story right after they donated was what pulled me in. That's Kickstarter's loop. It's brilliant. Okay, what about the funders? This is a two-sided marketplace. Let's look at what their experience is. So let's look at the core loop of the funders, and then we'll move on. Then we'll move on to the campaigners. So this is the Kickstarter core loop, which I think is just brilliant. The repeatable, pleasurable activity is exploring campaigns, watching campaign videos. It's really fun. Have you ever done it? They even have this thing where you can just go next, like on Hulu. And what's the trigger? Well, it can be something you see on social media, but it can also be something you're passionate about. I sometimes will go on Kickstarter if there's something I'm really interested in, like cooperative gaming. That's my big thing. And I'll search. I'll see what's there. I'll see if my friend put his game on there or not, which he said he was going to 6 months ago, but he didn't manage to. Right? And that satisfies an internal urge you need. Here's an actual campaign that you can look at. Now, what's the feedback? Well, the biggest feedback action on Kickstarter is donating. As a campaigner, you need that feedback. You need to know if people are going to actually convert or not, right? And as a customer, as a donor, as somebody who's engaged in this, when you donate is really the moment. There's also feedback for when you share or like, but that's really what they're trying to do. So there's a lot of feedback built around donating. They tell you you're part of a community. They encourage you to share. They send you a follow-up email. They tell you now you can go add a comment. A lot of stuff around that tells you you did the right thing. You're on the right track. You donated. So there's some of it, the feedback. Progress and investment. This is where Kickstarter just kicks it over the top. They tell you, as I said, they have really good timing of asking you to share. Sharing is great. Sharing is good for viral. If you ask at the wrong time, people won't do it. It has to be the emotionally right moment. They have the emotionally right moment. At Kickstarter, they ask you to share. They ask you to share your story. Or sometimes they'll ask you to support other campaigns. And then you go into the engaged trigger. What's the engaged trigger? You're seeing how your campaign's doing. All of a sudden, this went from, oh, that's an interesting campaign, to, that's my campaign. I gave to that. I'm rooting for that. And you start getting interested in how it's doing. That's how you create an engaged trigger. So briefly, let's look at now the campaigner or creator's journey. It's different, and here's the punchline. When you're doing a two-sided marketplace, when you're building an educational game where you have to sell to parents but please kids, anything like that, you have to understand both sides. So that's why we're doing this now. So what's that creator's journey? Well, onboarding is great. They have a creator handbook. They have a lot of support. There's a lot of onboarding. Habit building, stats. When some of you have run a Kickstarter campaign, right? Raise your hand if you've run a Kickstarter campaign. Somebody here. Okay. How often did you check your stats? Daily? Did you check your stats a lot? Did you check your stats a lot?
Hourly.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about an engaged loop. Oh my God, when you're running a campaign, you need the right stats. So it's just right there. And Kickstarter's gotten better and better and better. And then mastery is basically figuring out how to run a campaign and get funded. Figuring out how to set your goal not too high and not too low. Figuring all that stuff out takes a while. It can take several campaigns. Some people hit it the first time. The journey to mastery, you have lots of feedback, including if you got funded or not, the win-lose state in the Kickstarter co-op game. And the really cool thing that Kickstarter does, which is community-based, and Cindy had a hand in this, is mastery leads to greater impact. So if you want to know the secret of using a path to mastery to engage your best customers and keep them around forever, What people that get deeply engaged in your product want more than anything, they don't want trinkets. They don't want stupid stuff. They want impact. They want to know they're having an impact. They want to know they matter. They want to have a say in things. They want to be acknowledged for the relationships and knowledge and skills they've built up. That's what people want. How does Kickstarter do that? Look at this. They have this expert thing, which is people that have successfully completed more than one campaigns. They will now matchmake those people with beginners to help them up their learning curve and run a more successful campaign. So they're taking the people that have moved toward mastery and they're spinning them around and feeding them back into the beginners to create more value for everyone. All right, let's look at that learning loop for creators real quick. So the engaging activity, those of you who have run Kickstarter campaigns know this is reading and answering to messages, obviously checking your stats, but you're getting comments, you're getting messages, you're getting email, you're getting questions. You gotta be on that stuff, you gotta read and answer it, you or your team. It's very engaging and you wanna know, obviously, if you've read them all and taken care of them. So there's all kinds of stats that can help you with that. The simple feedback is, again, like Slack and like Snapchat. I've read my messages, I've taken care of this thing. Phew, good for now. Now I can go do something else. There's an example from the Kickstarter mobile. And then that progress, investment, and engage trigger that pulls people back. Progress and investment, if you're running a Kickstarter campaign, there's a couple of levels. There's during a campaign, and then there's over the course of your whole experience with Kickstarter. Let's just talk about the during campaign. During a campaign, what do? It's kind of similar to Snapchat. You create something new. Maybe you post an update. Since you were reading messages, you post a new update. Hey, thanks for the great comments, everyone. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe you send out a new email because there was a dip in your stats and you feel like you need to remind people. You create something new. Maybe you create a new reward level. This happens a lot. It's one of the best practices is introducing new reward levels over a campaign. All kinds of things to stay involved. And then, what is that engaged trigger? Checking your stats, checking your responses. Seeing how you're doing, seeing if there's new comments. So that's the Kickstarter's learning loop. And you can, once you break it down, you can really see part of why they're so successful at people using it for years. Now Kickstarter's special in one other way, and I'm going to give you a glimpse into co-op versus competitive dynamics. We go way deeper into this in my programs and at Game Thinking Live. But I've wondered for years, how did Kickstarter create such a collaborative environment? How'd they do it? Like, what's the magic? So if you look at this page, for instance, this is a Kickstarter campaign page, May campaign page. You see there's the amount left to raise, there's the total raise, there's a total number of backers, there's 4 days to go. That all seems good. Let's take a minute and notice what's not here. There's no leaderboard. There's no gold star people who gave the most money. There's nothing that looks competitive. Everything in it is organized around we. We raise this much money. I am a member of a community of 149 backers. And you look at that and you go, okay, that took years of fighting to get it to be that simple internally. Because all kinds of people said, oh, and people were asking, members, you want to know who to pay attention to, who not? Members were saying, people at Kickstarter, important campaigners, I want this, I want that. I want to have these competitive dynamics. They said no. And they said no because they had a vision for their platform and they knew that that would actually be off-putting to a lot of people that would then feel like their contribution wasn't as good as other people's. So they made a strategic decision to forego the short-term gains you see with competitive simple mechanics like that and go for the long game. Oops, can you fix that, Ann? I just somehow turned off the wrong one. There it is. Okay. So here's another example. This one's even clearer and better. This is the Kickstarter homepage. You're probably familiar with it. It's a spotlight. What do we see here? We have all the Kickstarter categories down the right side. You can click on them. Remember I said it's an explorable environment? This is one example. And then what do we have here? Projects we love. And there's one project per category. It's not a leaderboard. It's a spotlight. People say, oh, I want to highlight excellence and I want to role model excellence so other people do it. I need a leaderboard. No, you don't. Maybe a leaderboard's right for you. Maybe you've got sales guys who are competitive and that's the culture. But there's other things you can do, and this is one of them. You can use spotlights, where you just spotlight excellence. You don't spotlight crap, but you spotlight excellence, small projects, big projects, different kinds of projects, to let people explore. But also, what does that do psychologically to everybody who sees it? They think, that could be me. It's not just the big projects. It's not just the best project. It's projects that the staff loves, and it could be me. So a few tips, just to summarize from Kickstarter, you can apply to your project. A strong vision helps you say no. It's as important to say no to things as to put features in. What you say no to will define you. You can engage your customers with a learning loop. Feedback is more important than progress. Progress and investment are layered in and important. But figure out what your customers want to get better at and create a daily experience that makes them better at that. Reward mastery. Reward the 2 to 5% of the people that really go deep and really master your systems and are your best customers. Reward them with impact and opportunity and challenges and roles and spotlights, not with trinkets. You can use cooperative stats to build group identity like Kickstarter does. I showed you a super simple example. Know that you don't have to always use competitive stats. There are many other ways to get people to feel excited about progress. So I want you to think about, loosen your mind and really think about what that would mean for your product. And then consider using spotlights or something like that if you're trying to build a very inclusive, cooperative environment where your customers feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. And they want to make progress because they feel excited to be part of a group. If you want that kind of vibe, like Kickstarter has, the spotlights are going to set that up way better than a leaderboard. So there is an alternative. Doesn't mean a leaderboard's bad or wrong. It just means it's contextual. And it actually helps set the culture that you're communicating to all your users. So I talked to you today about 3 blind spots. Let's review them quickly. Falling in love with your idea. You heard about glitch. You heard about the painful failure of this amazing, wonderful idea, wonderful game. Turning it into slack. Having the fortitude to go for that and let go of the idea. That's how you cannot fall prey to that. Second blind spot is building the wrong MVP. And you learned about what a core loop is. So how many this picture before? I love this picture. And it's a really good picture. It's like, it's waterfall versus MVP, right? The problem is transportation. What this picture doesn't do, though, is it doesn't tell you if you're sitting there at your desk going, I need to build an MVP, exactly what to build. You have to translate that yourself. So, don't make the mistake of building your discovery stage and thinking you've tested your product experience. Okay, quick quiz. Let's say that you put up a fake landing page. What stage of the 4-stage customer journey is a fake landing page testing? Anybody? What? A fake landing page? You're actually testing your marketing message. Yeah, so thank you. You're testing your value prop, but you're not testing your value prop in the context of your product experience at all. So this was a huge aha for me, and I want this to be a good aha for you. Discovery, onboarding, habit building, mastery. A fake landing page is great, but that's discovery. All you're doing is testing discovery. You put it up and you say, how many people respond enough to this to give me their email, or whatever. But you could not be able to pull off what you promised in the landing page, and the landing page won't tell you anything about that. So if you want to test your marketing message and see how many people respond to it, a landing page is great. I have seen so many people waste their time with that because you know what? If you do that and then you focus on onboarding, which by the way often looks really good for stakeholders, and you kind of say, oh, I'm just going to ship something and do that, and I read the Lean Startup, you've just built yourself a leaky bucket, right? You just built a leaky bucket. And I cannot tell you how many clients I've had that have done that, and it's so frustrating because that doesn't work for anybody. So this is how you don't build a leaky bucket. You start with that, even if it's primitive, that day 30 experience. You get to that bit of value and you build it out. whether it's a concierge MVP, whether it's a mock-ups, whether it's, whatever form it takes, whatever form your artifact takes, that's where you start. That's the way you're going to 10x your ability to find product market fit. And then the last blind spot, the number one, is listening to the wrong customers. So I want to show you something it took me 20 years to learn, working with these amazing game designers like Will Wright and Alex Rogopoulos, which is about playtesting. How many of you do playtesting as part of your development process? Testing? You don't do like playtesting of early ideas? No? Okay, well, you should. Anyway, that's definitely what, it's the rougher your artifact, the better, because you're less attached to it. Most people do playtesting like this. They might start, and this goes for products and games. A lot of games do it like this. You start with like your team, what do you guys think? And you build in this idea. And then you might do a friends and family test. Then you might do closed beta. And then finally, you're going to get to ship. And that's where you're really shipping maybe to your early majority in Geoffrey Moore's language. Okay? But there's this other way, which I call superfan playtesting. A superfan is a high-value, high-need early customer. And this is where you start. Before you get to friends and family and all that, you start by finding a small handful, just like Paul Buckheit said, of the right early customers, and you start testing super early with them, and then you weave that through the rest of your testing. This is how you avoid the common blind spot. And it takes some work up front. That's where I come in. I have lots of ways to make that work easier. But the value you get is compounded as you go over time. So you want to playtest your ideas with aspirational early adopters, with people that really are early super fans, but they don't have to be doing things, they have to be aspirational. I have a lot more to say about that. We can do that, talk about that another time. And you want to run dozens of small high learning experiments if you can. This was from The Sims. So I mentioned earlier, I worked on The Sims for 3 years before it shipped. You might wonder, what were we doing? We were running dozens of small high learning experiments. The whole first year, you wouldn't believe what it looked like. It looked like crap. It was like these weird little world building experiments, not with our target market, with super fans. Will Wright had developed this mailing list of like maybe 120 simulation enthusiasts, because he built simulations. And they were these really nerdy simulation enthusiasts. They weren't our target market for The Sims, but they helped us bring it to life. They were crucial. And we ran all these experiments to find the right combination of features that made people not be able to put it down. And that took a good 1.5 years, just that core loop. I'll also tell you, Sims almost got canceled by executives who thought it was the stupidest thing they'd ever seen 6 weeks before it shipped. I was in the meeting. Luckily, they decided to give it a chance. Best-selling PC franchise of all time. So the way that you can avoid these mistakes is, one, hopefully you learned some ideas tonight, and please go try those. But I've developed, because it's so important and because it accelerates you so quickly, I've developed a toolkit that lets you execute on these tasks quickly and with guidance. So let me show you how this all comes together. I love this quote. I love Frank Lloyd Wright. It's so inspiring. And it's the same job we have as product developers. You can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site. And we want to use an eraser on the drafting table. That's what this is about. Earlier, getting that feedback earlier. So to help you see how this goes together, there's something called the Game Thinking Roadmap. You product managers, we love roadmaps, don't we? They're really helpful. So this is how it works. Up on the x-axis is the customer's journey, what we just went over. On the y-axis is our journey, the developer's journey. From idea through MVP, alpha, beta, launch, and expansion, hopefully, of the product as well. So because you do have to work on onboarding, and so this is really based on people saying, well, okay, I get it, core learning loop, I get it. But what about onboarding? We're not going to just forget it, are we? What are we going to do? Well, that's where a roadmap comes in. So this is what you do. You start, there. You start, as I mentioned earlier, working on your learning loop. And you have just enough onboarding to get those early adopters into your product, but you don't make it all fancy and pretty to impress the stakeholders. That's a waste of time. Later, when you're closer to beta and your core loop has been proven and you've iterated and pivoted, et cetera, you start to bring in more onboarding, continuing to do the core loop. When you get closer to launch, you really need to work on that discovery and get that working top of funnel, right? And you're continuing to develop these other things, but you start with the core loop. This shows you how you move on. Here's a surprising counterintuitive thing. Why is mastery so late? Why is the thing that game designers sink their teeth into that's so juicy, why is that late in your development process? Isn't that what you start with if you're doing games? Anybody have an idea? What do you think? Speak up.
You'll take your super fan, wow.
That's right. Thank you. Perfect. That's exactly right. Did you have a thought too?
Just that you keep them looking for more as they try to approach that mastery. Keep wetting their whistle.
You can do that. What's your name? Philip. What Philip was talking about structurally is actually, as a designer, exactly right, and that's what we talk about in our meetings when we're doing planning and road mapping. The reason, and when I was a young designer, like when I worked on Rock Band, which was eons ago, I was on the original design team for Rock Band, huge honor. I worked on it when everyone thought we were crazy, and it's like, oh my God, who's going to pay $160 and have plastic stuff littering their living room? Like, really, it was a very risky project. Now, you're looking back, you're like, of course, Rock Band, but we didn't know it was going to turn into Rock Band. So we're working on it, and I really wanted to design the mastery systems. I was so excited about the levels and the arenas because I play Guitar Hero and and the avatars, and I was so excited about all that stuff. And my boss was like, hold your horses, young lady. We got to work on, all we did for like 7 months would be in this room with paper over the walls, spit and baling wire instruments, like prototypes. All we were doing was getting one song to feel good. One song. 4 people on different instruments to feel good. 7 months. No mastery systems, no fancy avatars, and getting the feedback. If you've played Rock Band, you know how amazing the feedback is. The feedback makes you a better musician. That didn't come out of nowhere. That came out of so much iteration. And we had the discipline to not do the mastery systems for the reason you said, Philip, and also because, here's the other reason. If you design all those mastery systems and you have no good core loop, no good repeatable, pleasurable activity, it doesn't matter. So that's part of the other reason you do them later. Make sense? That all make sense? So keep these things in mind, like Slack did, like Snapchat did when they started, and definitely like Kickstarter did when they started. Solve a real problem for a small group of people. Don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and do like the amazing thing that's going to change everything. Have your vision, have your idea, but find a small, passionate group of people with a real problem you can solve. Give your customers something to get better at that's in their lives, not just in your software. Snapchat, for all its problems, really rewards people who figure out how to share glimpses of their life in a compelling way. And then think about the right social mechanics for driving engagement. Don't assume that zero-sum competitive mechanics, like you see in gamification, are right for everything. Know that there's other ways to engage people on a path to mastery that involve banding together to solve a problem bigger than yourself. So I'm going to pause for a minute. So how many of you are excited about using these techniques to innovate faster and smarter? Me too, because I've been, as I said, I've worked with entrepreneurs and I've seen the results, and it's all about the results. So I'd like to take a minute and tell you about the toolkit and tell you about a little bit about the event that's coming up. Is that okay? Okay. So I keep talking about this toolkit, and let me break it down real quick. So I've developed this toolkit. These are the steps. You'll recognize these from your standard learn, measure, build, or build, measure, learn with. And it's really how you do it with this particular framework in mind. You clarify your strategy and your assumptions. Any good experiment starts with a clear hypothesis. So you clarify your strategy. I have the canvas I use. You can use a lean canvas as well. That's great. This is similar but more specific to an MVP. Then you find your superfans. You don't talk to your friends. I have all these techniques, and you use a screener. It can be an online screener or live to find specific superfans, and there's 3 or 4 questions that are exactly the right filtering questions to ask. So this isn't a 60-question survey, this is a 6-question screener. Then you use a technique called speed interviews, which is 5 to 10 minute interviews. And you surface key habits and needs. Before you've built the thing, before you've talked to them about your solution, before you pitch, you surface habits and needs with these few very specific questions. Then, how many of you use job stories? Any job story fans? Well, if you work with me, you will be. So guess what? There's something better than personas. Personas are great. Personas often don't help you make key strategic decisions when it's beta and you've got, 50 features on the board you want to build and you have to pick 3. A lot of times a persona doesn't help you sort through that, right, Dan? Yeah. But a job story does. And so I use job stories and habit stories, which is a job story built around a habit. This is from the Jobs to be Done framework. Intercom and Paul Adams have pioneered this. In fact, you're going to hear about it from Tony Ulwick next month, who's also a guest on my podcast about all this stuff. So Tony Ulwick is the man. You should all come to that. But I use that technique adapted to product and game design. And it's really amazing for turning research results into design-ready form, which is what we all want. Here's our research results. Okay, we have to design. Where's the bridge, right? This is the bridge. Then you use this 4-step journey to design your framework. Think about what that customer journey is using those job stories. You prototype your core loop. And the reason you think about your journey first is it helps you frame your loop, helps you identify your core systems. You test the idea with early customers. I have a script that makes it easy to get the most out of a 1-hour playtest. You can also use your own. This has just some hot tips. And then you validate what you learned, and you decide what to do next using the Game Thinking roadmap. All the way around. So this is a system for running small, smart, high-learning experiments based on what I learned working on these breakthrough, worldwide, long-lasting hits. So I offer several programs to empower you, designers, product managers, product leaders, with these tools and the techniques. We have one coming up that's a 2-day global workshop. It's called Game Thinking Live. Dan is going to be a mentor there, helping out, giving office hours and coaching. And let me tell you a little about it. What this opportunity is, you can learn from world-class experts using my system, game designers. You may recognize some of these faces. Cindy Au from Kickstarter, Ralph Koster, Jeff Atwood, the founder of Stack Overflow. Maybe you've heard of Stack Overflow. Buster Benson, head of product at Slack. These people. And they're going to all be there supporting this project baseline. This is project-based. You're going to get hands-on expert coaching in a small group format over several days, working on your project, moving it forward, applying the templates I just showed you to your project. Now, I have another program which is an online course that lays all this out online in a self-paced way. And I have charged over $1,000 for that, and that's very good. I'm bundling that with this workshop. So you get the live workshop, but you also get online everything you need to work through self-paced before, during, and after the event. Why? Because you learn better that way. Any of you have heard of the flipped classroom? Any of you? Khan Academy, where lectures can be homework, but then when you're live with someone, it's much more interactive. That's what this is. But I'm really passionate about people learning and speeding up their process and then staying accelerated with the tools. And that's why I'm bundling these 2 things together. So what you get in this is the proven system, these 8 learning modules with all the templates, step-by-step instructions. You get weekly coaching leading up to and for a month after this event, and you get coaching during the event from great people like Dan and myself. You get a private group where you can interact with those coaches and peers. You get insider access to these VIP coaches online in our private learning community. You also get not yet published case studies showing how this comes alive for entrepreneurs and product leaders in India and Amsterdam and South Africa and places like that all over the world. So, you probably want to know price. Let me lay it out for you. So I do work privately in workshops and projects. That starts at $25K. I do private monthly coaching. And any of you interested in that, please get in touch. It's amazing. And that's $5 to $10K. This event is $2K for a ticket. Now that includes the online course and it includes the whole live event. But for tonight, because you're here, because you came out on a night, and because I'm really passionate about your learning, just for this group, I'm going to give you a $1,000 scholarship toward your tickets. So if you're interested and you're like, that's a little pricey, you know, I have sign-ups at that price. But if you're like me, I'm a budget-minded entrepreneur. Okay, I'm not made of money. I want to do this for you. If you're interested in this, and if you want to actually do it and take action, I'm going to make this a really easy and affordable decision. Because I would love to see you there. Because I love empowering smart people like you. I live for it. It's very, very gratifying. So, here's your code. Lean product 1,000. Take a picture. Log in. It's good for 24 hours. And I'll tell you what, you can still get Dan's discount, no problem. You can still join us. But I want to reward people who are committed and take action. You know why? You're going to get better results. And I've learned that through all my coaching. And so it's just here for you. If you want to take action and you want to do this, I'm going to make it easy and affordable. Go to gamethinkinglive.com for the next 24 hours, and that code will work. I would love to welcome you. And even if you don't, if this isn't going to work for you, I understand. I take the ideas tonight, try them out. I want you to try them. If you want to 10x your speed at executing it, then join us. I would love to support you and really help you learn these tools. So at this point, I'd love to take your questions about the material or any other questions you have. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, I just want to let people know the way we do questions so that everybody else can hear them is you have to have a microphone. We're not going to call on you unless you have a microphone. And we give the microphones out. So Perry's got one, and someone else will be running one. So just raise your hand. We'll give you a microphone. You may have to wait till the other person asks your question. And then
I love
we'll
questions. I live for questions. So don't hesitate. Awesome.
Okay. So can you say more about the MVP? So you said the best MVP is the core learning loop. So for MVP, do we focus on multiple core learning loops, or what is really then an MVP in your
So when you get into the details of it, especially if you're doing game design, it is multiple nested loops. But when you're doing an MVP, the key idea there is not to worry so much about the details of a core learning, because there's a lot of detail there. Work together, I'll walk you through it. But here's the key thing to remember. Prototype for your MVP. See if you can prototype and run through in whatever form your day 21 or your day 30 experience, not your own way. That's the key idea I want you to take away. So to make it a core learning loop, it needs to be a repeatable activity, right? It has to have repeatability. And it has to have some element of pleasure, even if it's just the satisfaction of completing something you know you have to do. And then what makes it a learning loop is feedback that helps your customer get better at something. But that can come a little later. Your first thing is, think about doing a concierge MVP of some service, for instance. Are you prototyping the very beginning where they discover the service and just get started with it? You could, but that's actually much easier than the day 21 or the day 30 experience. That's the hard part. So you want to, don't worry so much about the thing, but just think about what does the day 21 experience of somebody who's learned the ropes and is just coming back and getting value, what does that look like? See if you can prototype the simplest version of that for your MVP. Did that answer your question? Okay. There's some more. And there's a gentleman, and then you. Yes.
Hi, during the Kickstarter discussion, when you were doing the creator side, I didn't recall you mentioning anything about the social discovery part. Was that any different than the other cases? Or did I miss something?
I think there's an element of social discovery with Kickstarter, and I'm sure we could dig into that. but it's not as prominent. So it's not like it's not there. I just chose to focus on certain things, partly for brevity.
Yeah.
Because Kickstarter is such a deep example. I could have done an hour and a half on it.
Okay, I was just wondering if there's any.
No, there's
mention
still,
about discovery.
no, I think punchline with social discovery is that it's not right for everybody, that if you can think about how social discovery would work naturally for your product, it's gonna feel light and fun in a way that other kinds of discovery won't. And that's part of what makes something feel painful.
Yeah, so I'm a teacher and educator, and you mentioned EdTech, and there's a lot of products out there that either are great for education, but don't sell well, or sell really well, or awful for education. And can you talk about maybe why you think that is, and if your framework, or where in your framework that might be best addressed?
That's a really good question. So the first thing is there's many different factors that go into something being successful in the marketplace. Glitch is such a good example. It was a beautifully designed game. It was a very cool experience. The experience design of that game was great. Didn't succeed in the marketplace. I have a lot of clients in EdTech, so why don't I just speak from my personal experience, and then it'll be authentic. As with most products, and as with everything I'm talking about here, the core thing with EdTech is it needs to serve a real need. And so a lot of EdTech that's cool and interesting and maybe a good, comes out of academia and it's based on research or this or that, it has to serve a need and it has to exist in a really complex environment that already has stuff in it, if it's in the schools or even if it's in the homes. So EdTech, like for instance, if you're trying to get your software into schools, they switch to Common Core. It has to comply with Common Core. There's certain learning objectives and standards it has to meet. If it doesn't meet that, no teacher will use it. So there's that whole level that goes on in EdTech, which is what's going on with curriculum at the national and even at the state level. It's a big thing. Another thing is just the urgency of the need. So there are products that really address a core need, like a hole in the curriculum, like 7th grade algebra. Some great games. Dreambox has some games for teaching algebra. And they're really cool and they're successful moderately in the marketplace, not so much. Now let's talk about an incredibly successful company in the EdTech marketplace, okay? Age of Learning. Do you know Age of Learning? Anyone ever heard of ABC Mouse? It's a pre-K and K readiness program. It's an online program. It looks kind of old school. You wouldn't be impressed with the art. Unbelievably successful financially. And also, they have tons of happy parents. It's not for us. It's not for us Silicon Valley elite. It's for parents who are lower income and maybe don't have as many books in their home and really need to get their kids ready. It works. So they tapped into a marketplace where there was a real need for kindergarten readiness that wasn't all slick and fancy and for like the techies. That was for the people who were struggling to get their kids learning their letters in time for kindergarten. And this product knocks it out of the park. And it doesn't matter if the graphics are old school. Other brilliant thing they did, free to schools, sell to parents. That doesn't work for everybody, but that's part of what made that successful. They've recently launched in China. They're moving up to 1st to 3rd grade. They're growing. They took a huge investment from the Zuckerberg Chan Foundation. You get the idea. Did that give you some things to chew on? All right. So anything else? Yes. Anybody, whoever's in charge of the mic. I want to hear from all of you.
How do you prototype a day 30 experience for a user who hasn't been using it for 30 days? Someone is just seeing your product or your...
Well, they don't have to use it for 30 days. You just have to prototype it. It totally depends on what your product is. But I'll tell you what, I'll give you a real example from a real client. How does that sound? So I have a lot of clients in the Israeli health tech scene because I worked on Happify, which is a big success story. And so I have a client who was working on an app that would get you so you don't need glasses by exercising your eyes. Okay? That's their app. And we had this issue, which was how do you prototype it? Because it was a leaky bucket app. So they really wanted to drive that. So what we did was initially created simple mock-ups of what that would be. Even though we had a working app, we created mock-ups and we found Superfan and we ran the mock-ups by them and we used the script that I told you about for playtesting to make sure we were asking them things that would surface what their problems were. And basically, you figure out how to get people to engage with the series of steps that they might go through in a 30-day experience. Here's another example. I had another client who wanted to understand the 30-day experience. They used a competitor's product, and they tested the competitor's product with their clients because it was more robust than theirs. And they actually found people that were already using it and just sort of said, okay, you're already used to this. I'm now going to run a playtest with you where I want you to do it and talk out loud and tell me what's working and tell me what could be better, etc. That's another great trick. They learn so much. Laura Klein talks a lot about this. So those are two examples. You could use mock-ups. You could use a competitor's product. You could even just you could do a concierge service type of thing where you've got someone behind the scenes. In fact, Age of Learning, the ed tech company I told you about, did that recently for a playtest. We were trying, we're involved, Shufflebrand, our company is involved with Age of Learning doing their next generation of games, their innovative new games. So there was a playtest, and we wanted to test the metagame, the thing that connects all the little games. And we didn't have a metagame, and we wanted to test it. So we concierged it, and we had somebody literally typing stuff in on a computer in the next room that would show up on the other room as if it was messages, just responding to them. So that's another example. You can use a concierge test. So there's a lot of different ways to do it without actually building out your product. What you do have to have is you have to have thought through what that might be. That's where those techniques like the player's journey framework and core loop help you think it through so you can have a good prototype. I know there were more. Yes? Yes?
How do you avoid getting exhausted? When you're talking about testing with a group of users or guests, how do you avoid getting exhausted from their feedback? How do you advanced users?
Such a good question. Such a good question. The key thing is, step one is to have an awareness that they are your early adopters and that you will need to gather more feedback from a different group of people in your concentric circles later in the process. So step one is you contextualize your whole team. This is the early feedback we need to bring the product to life. It is not the same thing as the feedback we're going to need to launch the product. We will need more feedback from different people. So you stage it, and that's one of the things that confuses people. They go well, why wouldn't you get feedback from the same people over the course? You don't. Innovation diffusion theory, which is what Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm is based on, tells us through data that if you're going to bring innovation to life, you have to go through the early adopters. You can't jump over them and go right to the early majority. You have to first get the early adopters, get them to be delighted, and it might even be a different product or different feature set you're giving them. But you need to capture that early market first, at least their hearts and minds, and know they're loving it. And then you can cross the chasm and continue to develop it. So I worked on this with Ultima Online. One of the reasons I was hired was they had done just the problem you were talking about. So they had done a phenomenal job of delighting their early customers. And there were thousands, tens of thousands of people in beta. And they had a charismatic leader, Richard Garriott, Lord British, and people flocked around him. So we had these thousands and thousands of beta users with exactly the feedback you'd expect from early adopters. They wanted power features, right? They wanted all those things early adopters wanted. And they had gotten us to beta, which was amazing. It was very early, risky product. And then we launched, and then it stopped working because what they wanted was to dress up in medieval clothes and say thee and thou and role play. And all these people were coming in after launch who had played Doom and liked shooters and were like, I'm just going to shoot anything that moves. And these two crowds came together and it was just mayhem. And customer support was overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. And it was contradictory feedback. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? So part of what we had to do was fix the reputation system, which is a whole other story. But what we did was, I actually set up a way to get feedback from the middle group. Because if you're running, if you actually succeed at bringing your product to life and now you're going to launch, you have a bell curve. And at the ends are the people that love you and hate you. You guys all know this. The people that complain, you'll hear from them. right? And at the other end of the bell curve is your early adopters. They love you. They want you to hire them. They want to volunteer for you. They want, they want them. And in the middle is most of your customers. And those people you're not paying attention to super early, right, during MVP, but then you have to. So you need ways to get their feedback. So we set up, inline polls. We set up little daily, what do you think of this? We started to gather feedback from those people. And it was really hard because the dev team was like friends with the early adopters, right? They had been through the ringer with them and they were on the boards every day. And I had to tell the dev team, you cannot talk to them so much. You have to talk to the other people. But we love those people. Like, yes, but you can't just design for them. So that's how it goes. It's messy, and I think if you have the framework at the beginning where you say, these are the first people we're going to talk to, and then we're going to expand, then nobody's surprised, and it tends to go faster with fewer tiers.
All right, we have one last question, and then we'll give away some stuff, and you're welcome to hang out, and maybe Joel, stick around, you do some Q&A 101. Let's do our last question here.
All right, you may have actually mentioned this, but I'm just curious, where or how do I access the Game Thinking Toolkit?
So I share a lot of free information. So if you follow me on Twitter, or you come to my webinars, I share all of that. The toolkit itself is part of my programs.
Oh.
It's not just free.
I can't stay online.
You can go to Game Thinking Live and you'll get the entire toolkit. It's a membership site. And there's a reason for that, because it's non-trivial.
And your other domain is gettingtoalpha.com.
Yes.
And you have a lot of great free content there, like podcasts with me and
Yes,
Tony and
I
all these
do.
other people, right?
Yes, and
Okay.
more stuff coming.
Cool. All right. Well,
Thank you
let's
so much for
around.
hanging around.